Hello, and thank you for joining. My name is Jennifer Hill, an education specialist at the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service's National Conservation Training Center in Shepherdstown, West Virginia. In addition to hosting broadcasts, I have the honor of coordinating the Native Youth Climate Adaptation Leadership Congress, a week-long on-site program for Indigenous high school youth to grow in leadership, which we welcome you to learn more about. Before moving into our broadcast, I would like to acknowledge that the National Conservation Training Center is located on the unceded ancestral lands of many Indigenous peoples. While we have not found a full account, we are aware that many peoples traversed, cherished, and lived on this land. They include the Massawomack, the Haudenosaunee, the Shawnee, and the Delaware. As we learn more about the Indigenous people who continue to have relationships with this land, we better appreciate the good earth on which we work, live, and learn. We also pledge to grow and sustain relationships with Indigenous communities through collaboration on our training, outreach, our youth programs, museum exhibits, and more. We encourage others to learn more about the land on which they work and reside. Today, we're going to hear from Gayle Ross about the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples as an international instrument which was adopted by the United Nations on September 13, 2007, and how specific rights to culture are identified and put into practice. But first, a little bit about Gayle. Gayle Ross is an enrolled member of the Cherokee Nation and a direct descendant of John Ross, principal chief of the Cherokee during the infamous Trail of Tears. Her grandmother told stories, and it is from this rich Native American heritage that Gayle's storytelling springs. During the past 25 years, Gayle has become one of the best loved and most respected storytellers to emerge from the current surge of interest in this timeless art form. On the national stage, multiple White House administrations invited Gayle to perform, including being the only Native American performer at the Millennium on the Mall celebration in Washington, D.C., honoring American cultural heroes and heroines in the art and sciences and the National Book Festival's opening gala with other luminaries. Gayle's stories have opened evenings for such distinguished speakers as Maya Angelou, Scott Momaday, and Alice Walker. And she has appeared with notable Native American artists in other venues. Gayle has appeared at almost every major storytelling and folk festival in the United States and Canada, as well as theaters and performance art halls throughout the United States and Europe. Whether she is provoking laughter with a trickster tale or moving her listeners to tears with a haunting myth, Gayle is truly a master at the age-old craft of storytelling. Gayle, I'll now hand it over to you.
Wado, Jen, thank you. OSIO, everyone, thank you for tuning in. And I'd like to thank Jen and Indigenous Connections for giving me this opportunity. As Jennifer said, I'd like to share with you some specific articles in the United Nations Declaration that provide protections for Native peoples of the ownership of their cultures, languages, and traditions. And some of these articles have very specific rights that are protected. I'd also like to share with you a few examples from my own Cherokee Nation of these rights manifested in our world. Every tribal nation, of course, has their own cultures, languages, histories, and traditions. But I just want to share with you a few of our programs, which I think have been particularly successful. First slide. The United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples is an international instrument adopted in General Assembly in the UN on September 13th, 2007. The declaration, quote, constitutes the minimum standards for the survival, dignity, and well-being of the Indigenous peoples of the world. What's really important about the Declaration is that it protects collective rights. That's why it's peoples with an S. Most human rights instruments deal mainly with the individual person's rights, but collectively, we have the right to exist as peoples, nations, and communities. The Declaration was developed over 25 years of deliberation between member states and indigenous groups. It is the only human rights instrument developed in consultation with the rights holders themselves. Now, at the time it was adopted, 4 countries voted no. I think you might can guess. It was the United States, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. But since then, each of these countries has reversed its position and endorsed the Declaration, including the United States, the last to do so on December 16th, 2010, under President Barack Obama. Here's what he said at the time. The aspirations the Declaration affirms, including respect for the institution and rich cultures of Native people, are ones we must always seek to fulfill. But I want to be clear, what matters far more than words, what matters far more than any resolution or declaration, are the actions to match those words. Those are the standards I expect my administration to be held to. I think maybe some of us still remember the beautiful pictures of President Obama at a Lakota powwow with children climbing all over him, or joining the Yupik people in Alaska and learning a Yupik dance that he could do with them. These are the words of Tim Coulter, one of the original drafters of the Declaration and the founder and executive director of the Indian Law Resource Center. I hope that if you aren't familiar with Indian Law Resource, that you'll visit their website. They do remarkable work. Tim said, to see the promise of the Declaration become a reality, we must continue to fight for laws, policies, and relationships that take into account the permanent presence of indigenous nations in the U.S. Native nations are already implementing the Declaration in many ways. They're seeking fundamental changes in federal laws, policies, and practice, and the Declaration is a very useful guide in framing what better laws and policies should look like. It's an exciting time, he said, for the advancement of the rights of indigenous peoples. Indigenous peoples can and should use the Declaration as a powerful affirmation of our rights. Only through continued use will its provisions become a reality. And here's what other Native leaders had to say. The UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples have elevated the vision we as Native peoples have for ourselves and how others see us. That's Donna Harris, Comanche, president of the Americans for Indian Opportunity. The Declaration is proving to be vitally important in securing the rights of indigenous peoples in the United States. Our other tribes should also begin using the Declaration as an international standard for the protection and advancement of indigenous rights. Martin Avery, Navajo, member of the board of directors of the Indian Law Resource Center. And finally, we call on the President to fully implement the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. We specifically call for a review of all existing federal law to ensure that they are in alignment with the Declaration. There are 3 articles that I want to highlight for our discussion today. The first is Article 11, and you can see it says Indigenous peoples have the right to practice and revitalize their cultural traditions and customs. This includes the right to maintain, protect, and develop the past, present, and future manifestations of their cultures, such as archaeological and historic sites, artifacts, designs, ceremonies, technologies, and visual and performing arts and literature. Article 13, Indigenous peoples have the right to revitalize, use, develop, and transmit to future generations their histories, languages, oral traditions, philosophies, writing systems, and literature, and to designate and retain their own names for communities, places, and persons. Now, Article 31, this is by far the most expansive of the articles protecting our rights. Indigenous peoples have the right to maintain, control, protect, and develop their cultural heritage, traditional knowledge, as well as traditional culture expressions and the manifestations of their sciences, technologies, and culture, including human and genetic properties, properties of fauna and flora, knowledge of the properties of fauna and flora, oral traditions, literature, designs, sports and traditional games, and visual and performing arts. They also have the right to maintain, control, protect, and develop their intellectual property over such cultural heritage, traditional knowledge, and traditional culture expressions. Like all tribal nations, the Cherokee national identity has existed since prehistory. Our stories speak of both a long migration myth and an origin story that explains how the mountains of our homeland were made. The migration story says we came from an island off the coast of South America, sailed west, and then migrated north through Mexico, Central America, eventually reaching all the way to the northeast, where we stopped and lived with other Iroquois speaking tribes there. And then eventually we moved southward again, settling in what is the southeastern part of the United States. At the time of the arrival of the Europeans, Cherokee territory encompassed all or parts of the present states of North and South Carolina, Kentucky, Virginia, West Virginia, Alabama, Georgia, and Tennessee. Early Cherokee government was not centralized. Town governments were autonomous, and many of the governmental functions of today were then matters for the 7 clans of the Cherokee. Clans of that type were all important. And in our clan relationships, we prized balance and harmony. Our early economy was a balance of hunting and agriculture, which in many ways, next, mirrored the Cherokee concept of the need for balance between men and women. Cherokee pottery made by women, and here we see a wonderful painting of a Cherokee man in the historic periods. European contact began a decades-long transition, and it made many changes in both our economy and our cultures, beginning first with the British and then the Americans, treaty after treaty, land cession after a land cession, until finally in the early 1800s, only the heartland, a third of our original territory, remained. And then came President Andrew Jackson and Indian removal. Though the Cherokees fought in Congress and the courts, they were working so hard, but to no avail. In 1838, 14,000 Cherokees were forced west to Indian Territory, and it's estimated that over 4,000 died as a result of the removal. Sickness in the concentration camps they were rounded up and kept in, sickness and harsh winter on the trail itself, and then the deaths that followed in Indian Territory by people whose experience on the trail had made them weak and sick. In the West, Cherokees rebuilt our nation. And though through the coming decades, we faced many challenges like the Civil War, allotment, and the creation of the state of Oklahoma, we are still in our reservation, and we are the Cherokee Nation. Today, the Cherokee Nation is the largest tribe in the country with over 450,000 citizens worldwide. Over 141,000 Cherokees live within our reservation boundaries in northeastern Oklahoma, and our government provides many services, including health, housing, education. These are our wonderful Cherokee graduates from Northeastern State University. The tribe provides housing and health, education, employment, environmental protections, and many more. The Cherokee Nation is dedicated to protecting our inherent sovereignty, preserving and promoting our cultures, languages, values, and working to improve the quality of life for the next 7 generations. Tim Coulter of the Indian Law Resource Center has said it's important for the tribes to recognize that they are manifesting human rights with every time it comes to preserving and promoting culture, language. In Article 31, the most expansive list of protections, we find traditional games and sports. And one of the oldest sports of the Cherokee people is stickball. Every year at the Cherokee National Holiday, held on Labor Day weekend, the weekend is packed with cultural events, and it's held to celebrate the commemoration of the signing of a new constitution when we reached Indian Territory. This year's holiday theme was weaving our future. And this stunningly beautiful artwork was created and designed by Cherokee National Treasure Dan Mink. As is typical of Dan's work, there are layers and layers of meaning woven into this image. Most prominent is the little Cherokee water spider, a beloved figure from one of our most important stories that tells how the world was cold and dark because there was no fire. So Creator sent lightning to strike an hollow tree on an island in the middle of a great lake, and all creatures gathered there, and many creatures, big like bear, swift on wings like owl, the little racer snake who darts across the top of the water. One by one, they returned, changed in some essential way by their brush with fire. And then finally, the little water spider succeeded where the others had failed. She danced across the water. She wove a bowl from her threads. She lined the little bowl with mud and placed one tiny coal in the bowl and brought that fire back to the people. And the story is to remind us that great things can be done by the littlest among us. Now, looking at the water spider's back, you see the Cherokee Nation seal commemorating the signing of the Constitution. And in a circle around the spider, you see Dan's designs for each of the 7 clans. The holiday draws over 150,000 visitors to Tahlequah each year. And like I said, it's jam-packed with dozens of events, but one of the most anticipated is the Stickball tournament. The history of Cherokee Stickball is rich and complex, with the game serving as a judicial tool, a cultural tradition, and in the old days, a way to train young men for war. In fact, the Cherokee name for the game means little brother to war. Variations of the game have been played within and among many tribes for thousands of years. In ancient times, stickball was often used to settle disputes between tribes and villages over land and hunting grounds. And this form of stickball was played between men using sticks made of hickory and a ball made of deer hair and hide. It was played on a large field, and the men could not touch the ball with their hands. They threw and caught the ball in the cups on their sticks. Now, they threw and caught the ball and chased the ball, and it was a very rough and tumble sport because beyond the prohibition of touching the ball with the hands, there weren't many rules. A player scored points when he ran with the ball held in his sticks and crossed his goal line. If a player was injured on one team, the other team, one player would have to leave as well so that the teams were evenly matched. Today, our holiday stickball tournament is played on our Sequoia High School football field, often against teams from neighboring tribes like the Choctaw. Stickball is very popular, and our finest craftspeople put a great deal of time and effort into the sticks they make. This is David Cummingdeer, who is one of the best makers. His sticks are prized by all who play the game. You can see that pains are taken to make the stick balls functional and beautiful. These are some of David's finished stickball sticks. There's also a social form of stickball, and this is played at the ceremonial grounds, and it's a game, as you can see, between men and women. In this version, the carved wooden fish sits atop a high pole, and points are scored whenever someone can hit the fish with the ball. The men use the traditional sticks, but the women are allowed to catch and throw the ball with their hands. Whether it's a tournament game or a social game, stickball remains a vital part of the Cherokee identity and culture. Article 13 of the Declaration tells us that Indigenous peoples have the right to revitalize, use, develop, and transmit to future generations their histories, languages, oral traditions, philosophies, writing systems, and literature. For the Cherokee people, there is no better example of this than our beloved newspaper, the Cherokee Phoenix. the first Indian newspaper in the country. The first issue was printed on February 21st, 1828. The Cherokees loved the story of the phoenix. In the story of the bird who rises from the ashes, I think Cherokees saw their own strength and resolve. This is a copy of the first page of the first edition of the Phoenix. Yes. The story of the Phoenix begins with the story of our great genius, Sequoyah. He believed that Cherokees needed the power of a form of writing, and he worked for years to develop his syllabary, a form of writing, even when many people discounted his efforts. And some even called him crazy. But after years of false starts, Sequoyah finally struck on the system of creating a written symbol for each spoken sound in the syllabary. This is the only known painting. Charles Bird King of Sequoyah. It was painted in Washington, D.C., and he, of course, is holding a copy of the syllabary and pointing to a symbol. The syllabary was brilliant because once you memorize these symbols, and you can see how they take the form of the a, u, I, with different, each of those sounds makes a different syllable depending on what's before it. And once you memorize these, if you could speak Cherokee, you could read and write it. When the efficacy of Sequoyah's system was demonstrated, the Cherokee people enthusiastically embraced it. And within months, Cherokee people were writing letters to distant family, writing down formulas for Cherokee medicine and stories, and in general, putting the syllabary to work in their everyday lives. Several prominent young men went on lecture tours in the Northeast to raise money, and with the help of missionary societies, the Cherokees had the syllabary cast in type, bought a printing press, and the Cherokee Phoenix was born. In the 1830s, the Cherokee Phoenix was a powerful force representing our struggle to stay in our homeland. And it was printed in Cherokee and English. But as the Trail of Tears grew near, the Phoenix was silenced in 1834 when the Georgia Guard stole the press and burned the office of the Phoenix. After removal, the paper struggled to survive, always subject to the ebb and flow of government funding, and it ceased to exist for decades after the Cherokee were forced to accept allotment. However, the paper returned when the Cherokee Nation was officially reconstituted, and in 2007, it began using the old name of the Cherokee Phoenix. Today, the newspaper reports on the tribe's government, current events, Cherokee culture, people, and history. This is a Phoenix story on a very, very wonderful development in the Cherokee Nation. In our language preservation efforts, one of the most important and successful is our Cherokee Immersion School. It began with kindergartens and Cherokee translators. Now, this is an accredited school So it must conform to the curriculum that the state maintains. So everything, all teaching materials had to be translated into Cherokee. And the Cherokee teachers in the immersion school spoke nothing but Cherokee. And beginning with that class of kindergartners, each year adding a class, kindergartens became first grade, another class of kindergarten. First graders became second graders, and on up until our immersion school now goes through middle school. And here you see the chief and some of the other officials and the students breaking ground on what will be a brand new Cherokee Middle School. From the very oldest of our forms of cultural expression, written literature, we move now to one of the newest forms of creative expression. Cherokee people are justifiably proud of our successful and critically acclaimed productions coming from the entities under the umbrella of Cherokee Film. Cherokee Film encompasses 4 very successful programs: film production, our film studio, a Cherokee Film Commission, and the Cherokee Film Institute, which helps young students along in their dreams of becoming someone who can work in media, in film or television. As Chief Hoskins has said, the Cherokee Nation and the businesses are helping to grow and amplify television and film production in Oklahoma while making it possible for our citizens to be a part of it. Cherokee Film Production develops, produces, promotes, and distributes a variety of content in film and other media. The content always strives to tell authentic Cherokee stories on behalf of our tribe, its peoples, and its businesses. One of the driving forces in the success of Cherokee Film is Jennifer Lauren. She is the senior director of film and executive producer for the award-winning show OCO, Voices of the Cherokee People. Jennifer shoulders great responsibility among the entities of Cherokee Film. She sets strategies and oversees the work of all 4 entities. And as you can see from her bio, she is recognized for her creativity and her hard work on behalf of Cherokee Film. But Jennifer is not the only creative force in Cherokee Film. Here are only a few of the people who make up the Cherokee Film team: Michael Musante, Leanne Dreadful Water. Leanne has been with the tribe for so many years. She worked first in communications for the Cherokee Nation government, but today she is a project manager on the Emmy-winning Cherokee OCO team. She joined the OCO team in 2019 after 25 years of working for the government, and she is a producer, project manager, and historical researcher. Roy Boney. Roy is an artist and works in so many different media. He is a very talented animator, and he loves to make work that is true to the Cherokee culture and values, but is also innovative in so many different ways. Riker Six Killer, one of our young cinematographers. It was his dream to work in film. He was raised right here in the Cherokee Nation, and he is now a very talented young cinematographer. But the crown jewel of Cherokee Film, produced in our own film studios is OsiyoTV. OCO, Voices of the Cherokee People. Created in 2014, the earliest creators were Amanda Clinton, Jennifer, Lauren, Jeremy Charles, and a name you might recognize, Sterling Harjo. Using a documentary format, OCO was a magazine-style show featuring stories of interesting Cherokee people, beautiful scenery from around the nation, an almanac, and always a language lesson. With Emmy Award-winning journalist and Cherokee Nation citizen Jennifer Lauren as host, the show was the first of its kind in Indian country and was widely acclaimed from its inception. Here are some of the scenes from our new season coming up. This is David Scott, a very talented gourd artist and a full-blood Cherokee speaker. These are some of the awards that OsiyoTV has garnered over the 10 years that it has been in production. They've been nominated for 39 Heartland Emmys and have won 29. They've won numerous Telly Awards for directing, writing, production, and more. And many of the individual short documentaries featured on the show have won awards in film festivals around the world. And these are some of our proud Cherokees holding up the Emmys that OCO has won. The new season promises to be very, very exciting. I think probably you are all familiar with the Chief Bigfoot Memorial Ride held every year in December. It's a pilgrimage on horseback for the Wounded Knee, for a pilgrimage on horseback to Wounded Knee, retracing the historic journey of the Lakota chief and 350 of his followers that ended in the Wounded Knee massacre. It's a 300-mile journey to remember and honor the past, the history, and the Lakota people who lost their lives that day. Now, for the Cherokees, for us, our memorial journey is called Remember the Removal Bike Ride. Remember the removal. It began in the Cherokee Nation in 1984 for Cherokee youth to retrace the Trail of Tears and get a glimpse of the hardships their ancestors faced when they made that same trek on foot from years before. The first year, about 20 students and their coordinators and consultants from Boston College set out on bicycles, followed by vans and a school bus of provisions, including tents and food. The Remember the Removal Ride retraces, as you can see here, the 950-mile northern route. Today, the riders are selected in an interview process. They undergo a complete physical and they train for 6 months. Along the way, they are joined by historians and others who help them learn about their ancestors and what they faced on that terrible journey that took so many Cherokee lives. This is where the ride begins, Nuachota, site of the historic capital of the Cherokee Nation. They go on to Red Clay, Tennessee, which was the last capital in the East, organized in Tennessee after the Georgians expanded their laws over Cherokee people and made Cherokee gatherings illegal. Now, one of the most beautiful things for every Cherokee who's ever been to Red Clay, There is a beautiful spring, which is considered sacred. It's called the Blue Spring Hole. It's off limits to park visitors, but the riders are allowed in for a ceremony called going to water, and the park staff keep other visitors away so that the riders can pray in private. Along the way, the riders see many historic sites, and there are interpreters and teachers, cultural experts, historians who help teach them about the things they see as they follow the trail that their ancestors did. They visit the grave of Chief Whitepath outside Hopkinsville, Kentucky. When this venerable leader passed, Cherokees marked his gravesite with a tall pole with a white cloth attached to the top, so that those who came after would note his passing. Blythe Ferry. This is a particularly solemn place where the riders stop. Crossing the Tennessee River at Blythe's Ferry was particularly sad for the Cherokees on the trail because it was at Blythe's Ferry that they left their homelands behind them for what must have seemed like a very dark and uncertain future. Now here you see the physical endurance that these young riders have, and they were tested many times as they made their way through Smoky Mountain roads. Many of the young people, they bond with their teammates, and they say that it was depending on their bonds for the strength they needed as a team to make it up each steep incline. But the landscape did provide the occasional refreshing break from riding. Here, the kids are practicing their yoga moves under a sparkling, cool, clear waterfall. And here at the Mantle Rock, a sacred site, they spent time reflecting on their ancestors who followed that trail so long ago. On a cool, rainy day, you can see two of the riders here lifting their fists in salute to the brightly colored star on the side of a gray weathered barn. It's not the seven-pointed Cherokee star, but this is Arkansas, and the riders know they are getting closer and closer to the end of their long journey. The return of the riders is always a deeply moving experience. People line the road into Tahlequah, waving signs and cheering, and the square here in downtown Tahlequah is packed with family, friends, and well-wishers cheering themselves hoarse, more than a few with happy tears in their eyes. But even more than the formal greeting and ceremony with the principal chief, as you can see here, the happiest moments are the welcome home hugs from family. I'd like to finish. We're going to show just some slides of a few of the federal programs that have funding for language preservation, cultural preservation, and I don't know in what order they are. So Rob, if you'll just bring them up one at a time. The Administration for Native Americans, they fund a variety of services, and the grants, the competition for the grants is extreme. They promote self-governance, self-determination, by providing grant funding for culturally driven projects. The Cherokee language, we have a new immersion program called Little Cherokee Seeds, where babies and their mothers spend each day immersed only Cherokee language spoken, and some of our finest speakers are the teachers. The Tribal Tourism Grant Program, it supports economic development and fulfills the mission of the Native Act by providing funding for tribes to conduct informed feasibility studies to help them make decisions about potential tourism projects. The Cherokee Nation has a thriving program under our businesses with Cherokee cultural tours. We have so many new museums, and the program brings in hundreds and hundreds of visitors each year. The Living Languages Grant in the BIA. Language preservation is, of course, of paramount importance. And beginning with our immersion schools, we have many, many language preservation programs, the Little Seeds, Cherokee classes in person and online, and a master's program where Cherokee students are paired with language speakers for an intense learning experience. Tribal heritage grants from the National Park Service, state, tribal, local plans and grants from the Historic Preservation Fund. These are the listings of who may apply for these grants and a list of what is funded. And you can see it's quite extensive. These are the grant amounts, processes, and deadlines. And for more information, go to their website at gonps.gov/tribal heritage. And for application assistance, don't hesitate to contact the National Park Service at the number given there. That's it. Those are the programs that I was able to find. I wanted to highlight them briefly. There are, of course, it's worth doing the research to find out how many programs are available for cultural preservation, language preservation, and I hope that people will put the research in to find out, because some of this funding can provide so much in the way of your tribal programs. And I want to thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you've enjoyed these little glimpses of Cherokee cultural preservation in action, how we manifest the rights protected in the Articles of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. Thank you. Oh, Wado, as we say.
Gail, thank you for sharing your time with us today. We truly appreciate your expertise on this, and we hope that all of you will join us next month on Wednesday, October 16th at 3 p.m. for our next Indigenous Connections broadcast, when we will hear from Chad Smith on government-to-government relations. As a reminder, each broadcast is recorded and available on NCTC's website. If you wish to learn more about this broadcast series or be added to the listserv, please email myself, Jennifer Hill, at jennifer_hill@fws.gov. We also welcome your broadcast suggestions. Thank you for joining today.